The story began when our main character was in a critical condition after being hit by a truck. The main character dies on the surgical bed and awakens in a different world. He is born to Paul, the swordsman, and Zenith, the healer, who gives him the name Rudeus. Rudeus was able to learn the language of the new world and to read, and he eventually began using magic because he had kept his memories of the previous world. Rudeus has a strong magic aptitude and can perform magic without reciting spells. To properly teach Rudeus magic, his parents hire a magic tutor named Roxy Magurdia. Rudeus recalls dying while attempting to save some teenagers. He is content with his new life and continues to train with Roxy and spar with his father. He learns that Roxy is a descendant of Superds, an evil race. Rudeus was a victim of bullying in his previous life, and the trauma caused him to become a shut-in and a Neet. With Roxy's assistance, Rudeus lets go of his past trauma, and then she takes him outside to complete his final exam. Rudeus succeeds on the exam and says the spells perfectly. Roxy tells Rudeus she can't teach him anything else, so she leaves the Greyrats and gives him a charm, and Rudeus thanks her for everything. Rudeus finally starts going outside by himself after Roxy leaves. Then, he comes across a half-elf child being bullied by 3 other children. He saves and befriends Sylph, but he thinks she's a boy. He starts teaching Sylph magic after realizing she has a high potential for magic. 6 months later, during a storm, Rudeus brings Sylph home so they can take a bath together. He forcibly removes her clothes and discovers that Sylph is a girl whose full name is Sylphiette. Sylph becomes upset and begins to avoid him, but she eventually returns to him. The Greyrats are about to welcome a new baby when the maid announces that she too is expecting and that Paul is the father. Zenith becomes very upset, so the maid suggests that she leave to raise the child somewhere else, but Rudeus suggests they stay. They have 2 daughters, Norn and Aisha, and after receiving a letter from Roxy, Rudeus considers leaving for Renoa Magic Academy. Sylphiette begs him not to leave, so Rudeus agrees and decides to look for a job to pay for them to go to school. Paul decides to send Rudeus away to his cousin Philip Boreas Greyrat via his friend Ghislaine. Rudeus is to teach Philip's daughter magic and is not allowed to return home for 5 years. Rudeus meets his student Eris, who is hostile to him, but Rudeus decides to gain her trust by creating a fake kidnapping with her father's permission. Rudeus later realizes the kidnapping has become real, so he devises a plan to flee. He confronts the kidnappers and holds them off until Ghislaine arrives to rescue them. When they return home, Eris finally accepts Rudeus as her tutor. 2 years later, the Boreas decide to celebrate Rudeus' birthday, and Philip permits him to marry his daughter, Eris. Rudeus declines and expresses disappointment that his parents couldn't attend his birthday celebration. Eris bestows upon Rudeus a high-quality magical staff, and when he goes to bed for the night, he discovers Eris waiting for him in his bed. Eris gives him the green light to move to her, but later kicks and hits him when he proceeds to have sex with her. Eris apologizes to Rudeus and asks him to wait 5 years till he turns 15. Later, as Rudeus demonstrates the Cumulonimbus spell to Eris and Ghislaine, a dark cloud brimming with powerful mana emerges above them. The explosive mana descends the earth, separating Rudeus and Eris from Ghislaine. Rudeus awakens in his past human body, where he meets a man-god who tells him to rely on and help the man who saved him. He awakens to find that he and Eris were transported to the Demon Continent and found by Raoard Superdia, a Superd race member. Rudeus recognizes that Raoard is friendly and encourages Eris to trust him too. Raoard takes both of them to Magurdia village, Roxy's birthplace. Raoard tells Rudeus about his clan's connection to the demon god Laplace and how he turned his people evil. He tells Rudeus his goal is to clear his clan's name, and Rudeus decides to help him reach his goal. The trio departs Magurdia for Ikarasu, but to gain entry, Rudeus dyes Raoard's hair purple and forces him to pretend to be a Magurdian. They decide to become adventurers under the moniker Dead End. After the Mana Blast, Paul and Norn are the only members of the family who are still alive, while the rest are missing. Dead End arrives in a coastal city with plans to travel by ship, but the cost of having a Superd on the ship is very expensive. So Rudeus meets the man god once more, and the man-god tells him to buy food from a street vendor and take a walk through the back alleys. He meets a vagrant and offers her food. She introduces herself as Kashirika Kashirasu, the great emperor of the demon world. As a thank you for feeding her, she gives him a demon eye. His demon eye allows him to see a few seconds into the future, and he was able to save Gallus Cleaner from dying. Rudeus promises to release Gallus's goods from Zant port when they arrive, in exchange for Gallus agreeing to smuggle Raoard onto the ship. After 3 months, Rudeus and his party depart for the holy country of Milis. Rudeus finds his father in Milis and begins bragging about his adventures, but Paul is annoyed that Rudeus is unconcerned about the other family members. They have a fight, but later reconcile and apologize to each other. Rudeus then departs, promising to find the rest of the family. The man-god tells Rudeus where to find Aisha and Lilia. Rudeus saves Aisha without telling her his name. Aisha wishes to write a letter to her father and requests Rudeus' assistance. Rudeus is invited to the royal palace by Roxy, but when he arrives, he discovers that Pax Chiron, the 7th prince of Chiron, is holding Lilia hostage. Rudeus falls victim to the trap and is imprisoned in a magical barrier until he's approached by Zenoba Chiron, Chiron's 3rd prince. Zenoba admires Rudeus' art and decides to let him go. Rudeus and his party then rescue Lilia and Aisha. On their way back to Eris's house, the party comes across a stranger. Rudeus asks about the stranger's name, and the stranger, Orsted, asks about Rudeus' knowledge of the man-god. Orsted attacks them after Rudeus confirms that he knows the man-god. He kills Rudeus and tells him to deliver the message to the man-god that the dragon Orsted would kill him. Rudeus wakes up in his former self again. The man-god tells him about Orsted and assures him that he's not dead yet. He awakens to Eris, who informs him that Orsted was the one that healed him. When Rudeus returns home, the village is destroyed and is in ruins. Raoard then decides to part ways with Rudeus and Eris, and they bid each other farewell. When Rudeus and Eris return to the Boreas home, they find Ghislaine. They come to learn of Eris's family's demise. Eris requests that she be left alone. Later that night, Eris comes to Rudeus and asks to give birth to his kittens. They have sex, and by morning, Rudeus discovers that Eris has abandoned him to travel with Ghislaine, leaving him depressed. Rudeus remains in his tent, reminiscing about his past life. Meanwhile, Eris is on a journey to become stronger with Ghislaine. Roxy approaches the vagrant girl and requests that she look for Rudeus and his family. Kashirika discovers Zenith in the labyrinth city of Rapan, on the Begarit continent, where she appears to be held captive. Finally, Rudeus overcomes his depression and sets out to find his mother.